For years and years and years, bare root strawberries have given me such a hard time, and I think they're especially hard in a warm weather climate like where I live here in Florida. So I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to do something a lot easier, and that is going to be plugs, not to be confused with plants. So today we're going to set up the Greenstalk together. We're going to get our plugs transplanted, and we're going to walk through the pros and cons of bare roots as compared to the pros and cons of plugs. And don't worry, I am going to share with you where I got my plugs and my bare roots this year and in previous years, so you can kind of pick between them which one you want to go with. But before we get started, we got to work on this soil. So I opened my book. If you haven't gotten this, this is the Homegrown Florida Gardening Guide. It's a guide for Florida gardeners, and it talks about how to grow pretty much every vegetable, including a few fruits like strawberries. So I want to focus on opening the book up and figuring out what we need to do for the soil. So the section here, mix in berry tone with compost and peat moss. This will provide the plants with a little bit of acid, nutrients, and it'll help with the proper moisture level. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some used soil, and we're going to add to it peat moss. We're going to add to it fertilizer. I don't have any berry tone right now, so we're going to use something else. I'll show you that. And then we're going to add some compost. But I'm going to do the compost in a layering method. You could mix it into the soil, but since the strawberries have such, shallow root systems, I want the compost to be right at the root system. So I'll show you how we're doing that. You can definitely reuse potting soil. It just takes a little bit of work to get it ready, which is what we're going to do today. And while we do that, let's talk about the pros of using bare roots, because there are a lot of pros, and a lot of them might be a good enough reason to chance it and do the extra work that's required for bare roots. And probably the one that stands out the most to me is going to be cost. Bare roots generally cost a lot less than plants or plugs. So you can buy strawberries in a couple different ways: bare roots, plugs, which are little tiny plants, and then full-blown plants, which are going to be the most expensive way. And the plugs are kind of in the center, but I've noticed the more bare roots you buy, or the more plugs you buy, the less expensive they become. So it's like a bulk sale situation. That doesn't necessarily happen with plants unless you find a nursery that's willing to do that. That's not been my experience. The next pro of bare roots is varieties. So you can find a lot of different kinds of varieties when you get them in bare roots versus when you get them in plugs, and certainly when you get them in plants. Plants, man, I've only seen one or two plant varieties. In plugs, I've seen a little bit more, but in bare roots, your heart's desire, you can get whatever kind of variety you want. Now, this is particularly important to us Florida growers because we need a very specific kind of strawberry. We need a strawberry that is early maturing. We need a strawberry that can handle the heat, that is not a long day variety, because ours, we're growing them during the winter. So we don't want something that only flowers during the winter. UF has a really good website that talks about some of the different varieties. Things like Brilliant, Sweet Sensation, and Camarosa, I think is how it's pronounced. All of those are kind of meant for the Florida Festival, I believe is another one. So when you get bare roots, it's a little bit easier to find bare roots in the variety that you want versus plugs and plants. And the last and final reason why bare roots might be the way to go for you is that you can probably have a higher likelihood of getting them shipped to you instead of having to go to a nursery and just picking out exactly what they have. Because bare roots come from everywhere, and because they have such a wide variety of varieties, then they can ship pretty much anywhere. And you don't have to put them in right away. You can put them in a little bit of a refrigerator, or kind of set them outside in a shady spot, maybe let them sit in some water or some soil, and it's not a rush, which is nice with bare roots. You would think that we have enough soil already, but not quite. So I need to fill up 12 tiers because I bought way too many plugs. So what we have to do is make a huge pile of soil, which is what we have right here, but I need to add a little bit more. This is where the peat moss comes into play. So earlier we said we were gonna do peat moss, compost, and fertilizer. Here is where I'm adding that peat moss. Now you could use straight peat moss. I'm using Pro Mix soil because I have it. It has good water retention abilities. It has some perlite in it, and it has a little bit of nutrients in it. Not a lot, and we're just gonna add this to this pile that we have, and we're gonna fertilize it all together. This soil is probably gonna hold on to water quite a bit, so I'm gonna add a little bit of perlite. You can also, whoop, that was a little bit more than a little. Oh, okay. We're gonna roll with it, right? It's all good. We're not gonna make the same mistake, although I think I actually got a perfect amount on there. Once we mix it in, it'll be all right. I'm also gonna add some fertilizer. This is Nutri-Rich. If you have a smaller amount or you have berry tone, you should probably go with that. Azalea mix works really well, or a bit azalea tone. Something that's a fertilizer that's a little more acidic in nature. This one isn't very acidic in nature, but that's okay. The peat moss will help with some of the acidity. All right, so that's good. We're gonna just use that amount, and now we're gonna stir it in. Okay, it looks like that perlite mixed in pretty well, thank goodness. It's a little heavy, but not gonna be bad for a Florida garden where we get a lot of rain. So now we're gonna fill up each one of these. I have to fill up 12. We're just gonna start with 6 and see how far this soil gets us with 6. And we're gonna do it in layers. We're gonna put this soil on the bottom and leave space in each one of the pockets for a nice big bunch of compost that we're gonna plant the actual strawberry plugs into that. But let's talk about, while we do that, let's talk about the cons of bare roots. So probably the biggest con of bare roots is the fact that they have the highest rate of failure amongst all of the different types. When it's between a plug, a plant, and a bare root, you have more likelihood that the bare root is not going to take as compared to the plug or the plant. And that's because what we're doing to these bare roots is not natural, right? We are forcing them into dormancy. A lot of the times they force them into dormancy, they dry them out, they pull them out of the ground, and then they ship them around the country, and then these poor plants wake up in a climate very, very different from where they came from. And so they're not particularly happy, and it tends to have a high failure rate, not even including the fact that bare roots have to be planted a very specific way, they have to be hydrated a specific way, they can't be planted too deep because there's a crown there. I'll show you that when we get to that part. But that crown, if it gets too deep or too high, it doesn't do well, and a lot of the times the plant dies. So you usually get a pretty high rate of failure from bare roots. Now, factor that into the cost. I did this actually. So I bought a bunch of bare roots. I started them. Almost every single one of them died. And guys, I'm familiar with how to plant them, their moisture levels. I think it was a hardening off issue for me, which is another one of the cons. But because of that, the cost, the pro of the cost, I ended up with one plant left of my bare roots. So I ended up spending like $25 for one bare root plant that looks not too happy. So I ended up spending more. So the pro of the cost is that you get more bare root plants, but the con is that not all of them survive. So you kind of have to factor that in to the pro of the cost. The other side of that is hardening off. And I don't think enough people talk about this, and it's probably because a lot of people who get bare roots are in northern climates. And because they're in northern climates, they don't have to necessarily worry about hardening off like we do down here. Because a lot of people are getting them in September or October, or maybe they're even getting them in spring. They're in beautiful weather. Our September and October is still quite hot. And we're talking about plants that could be coming from a cooler weather place, you know, like Michigan or maybe California. Even though it gets pretty hot in California, by this time of year they're starting to deal with a lot more nicer weather. They're not dealing with our heat and our humidity and our rain and all the crazy stuff that we have towards the end of our hurricane season. So because of that, our hardening off process is more involved. And so now you have a bare root plant that is needing to be hardened off, right? It fell asleep, it went dormant in some beautiful weather, like 70 degrees, and then we wake it up, it's got dried roots, and then we wake it up in a place that's 90 degrees in the day. And it's humid and it's hot and it's, you know, raining every single day. It's just not the environment that those plants came used to. And then add to that, which I think most people have this issue, is the transplant shock. A lot of us don't really think that strawberry plants have transplant shock, but trust me, they do. When you take them out of the ground and move them, they're being transplanted. And even though they're dormant at that stage, they still experience transplant shock. Not necessarily the transplant shock that we think of when we think about transplanting any kind of plant. It's the transplant shock of being awoken and whether or not these plants have the things that they had before they went dormant. So think about the soil as the plant's home, right? Before they went dormant, they are at the perfect height. You know, they don't have their crowns too high, they don't have them too low, they have a certain kind of soil that they've become used to, right? Maybe they're in something more peat moss, maybe they're in something more clay, who knows, right? And then they go to sleep, you know, they have the perfect amount of water for them, they've adjusted to this. Then we put them asleep, we ship them halfway around the country, and we wake them up, and the temperature is different, so the hardening off period, but then their home is different. We're using a different soil than what they were used when they were at their nursery. We're using a different level of moisture maybe, because we don't know what they were like. Maybe we'll get it right, maybe it'll hit right. And then also we're doing a different nutrition. We may not be using the same fertilizer that the nursery used. And then on top of that, we're planting them, and I don't know if we planted them perfectly. Did we plant them a little too high? Did we plant them a little too low compared to how they were planted before? So they are now kind of out of place in their own home. They're waking up in this soil that they don't know, with this moisture level that's different, with the soil is different, and the heat is different, and it all leads to excessive transplant, bad hardening off, and that's why they die. So I've gotten the soil in here that I want. Now I need to add some compost. I'm just gonna add a scoop of compost right into each one of the little holes. I want the strawberries to sit in the compost right underneath them. I did this one year and it gave me the most incredible strawberries ever. Like, I got so many strawberries, it was amazing. Okay, now we just need to do that. I still have some eggshells, don't worry about that, guys. I might like to place them first before watering them, because otherwise they get super, super heavy. I'm a little nervous because it's got a little bit of a wiggle. I've never done 7 high. They are designed to do 7 high. I just never have done it. I have a little bit more confidence that it'll hold up right here because I have grown 5 high here. So, and also like strawberries don't get super heavy. It's not going to be like sweet potatoes that are just going to keep getting heavier and heavier, and then they have the vines crawling out and stuff. So, famous last words. All right, let's get them planted. All right, now we're going to plant these guys, and we're going to talk about the pros of plugs, and then I'll get to the cons because there are a few cons. Don't these look amazing? Look how special they look. Okay, let me show you what a plug looks like, because I'm not sure it's common knowledge the difference between a plug and a plant, because a plant is very much like a plug, but a plug is a smaller plant. It's a younger plant. They basically took a mother plant and they rooted one of her runners into a little soil plug, and then they sell just the tiny little plugs, whereas a plant is much larger, more full grown, more mature, and in like a pot. So it requires more time, more soil, more product. I mean, they literally ship them like this with nothing around the bottom. I'm suspecting that shipping is actually pretty cheap too, because they're basically almost the same weight as a bare root. Bare roots are a little bit less because they don't have to deal with the soil or the moisture. Now, once we added some water, we lost some soil. So I'm going to add just a tiny bit of soil to each one of these pockets up here, and we're going to plant these guys. Now, this one right here, the one that's sitting up there, those are Camarosa. Hopefully I'm saying that right. It's the first time I've grown them. I usually grow Brilliance, Chandler, or Albion. But Camarosa is actually recommended by the University of Florida as a great strawberry for Florida, right next to Festival and Sweet Sensation. So I'm really excited to grow those. They are very similar to Brilliance, I believe, in that they're an early season variety. And I loved Brilliance. The thing that I didn't like about Brilliance is the fact that they don't put off very many runners. So hopefully maybe this one will put off more runners and I can get more plants in the future. I think the reason why they don't put off very many runners is because Brilliance, they don't do well in Florida. I had 30 plants last season of Brilliance, and I think 3 of them survived. So that's like a 90% loss rate, which is really bad. My Chandlers were never that bad. Hopefully Camarosa is better. So let's talk pros and cons, right? So the pros, number 1, they come in a plant form, which means they're more mature. Bare roots have to start from 0. They have to put on leaves. They have to put on a root structure. Because the root structure that's on them, you think that that's what is going to start growing. They don't regrow. They have to grow new root structures. So these guys already have roots. They already have leaves. So they're more mature at this stage. So that means you're actually going to get your fruit sooner. Isn't that cool? All right, let's put these. Just so I can get them out a little bit easier, I'm just going to lay them on here. The next pro for these guys is going to be that they are more durable. So because you're not dealing with a plant that's got to get used to soil and temperatures and hardening off and growing new roots and growing new greens, you're going to get a plant that is a little bit more healthy, a little bit less transplant shock, which is what causes a lot of those bare roots to die. So you have a lot higher of a success rate with these than you would with bare roots. And another really good pro for these guys is the fact that it's almost impossible to plant them wrong. So a lot of us in the gardening world know that you plant your plants no higher than the base of the soil, right? They say always at ground level. So that's what we're going to do with these guys. And by doing that, following the normal instructions of transplanting plants at soil level, you have almost zero likelihood that you're going to plant these too deep and that they're going to rot, because strawberries are very, very sensitive to being planted too deeply because they have a little crown. And it's almost hard to see the crown when they're this young. But if you look, that little spot right there is the crown. It's like a thicker part of the strawberry, and when they're young like this, it's really hard to tell. But you can see that they're all kind of bunched together. And if I plant this too deep, if I say I plant it like up to here, that will rot. If I plant it too shallow and roots are exposed, that could also kill the plant. But the fact that these are plugs, it tells me exactly where to plant it. I just don't plant it any deeper than that. We'll do this one together. So I'm going to create a little opening. Boy, that Greenstalk wiggles. All right. And I'm going to measure this. Just keep putting it in until the soil level reaches. And I think we're right there. I'm going to add a little bit more soil. And I'm just going to brush it away so the soil doesn't actually sit on the crown. It's where I can still see the crown, but the rest of the plug is completely buried. And then just to secure this guy, we're going to water him in gently. And you can kind of see, hopefully you can see, that the crown is right here. The plug is below the surface. And it's almost like the plug is sitting up just a tiny bit. This is perfect. I'm going to add a little bit of mulch. And once we add the mulch, then the plug will be right at the level of the mulch. Now we just got to get the rest of them in. Before we move on to the cons, check out these babies. These are another set of plugs. These are chandlers. Now, I'm used to growing chandlers. I've grown them before. Never from plugs, only from bare roots. And I am astonished. I mean, these things are so big. I'm expecting that they're going to put on flowers any day. That's how mature they are, and that's one of the pros. But here's another one. I was blown away by this. They have runners already. I'm not sure if I'm going to let them stay. I think I'm going to clip them off so they can focus on growing instead of putting out runners. But that gives me hope that these are going to produce runners. Now, these I got from a different place. These are from, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, Ison, I-S-O-N, Nursery and Vineyard. First time ever getting them from them. First time ever getting from Haas as well. Both of these places are in Georgia. So the whole transplanting shock and the whole, hardening off and not used to our weather doesn't really apply because Georgia's pretty much our weather too. But there are some cons. So let's get into them while we put these guys in. I am so impressed with plugs. Look at the root structure. It's beautiful. On top of that, I think there's more than one plant in some of these. So I'm going to leave them together this year because there's one right here. There's one right here. I'm going to leave them together, and next year I can separate these. I leave them together this year because that root system is a little bit root bound. This one especially because there's two plants in there. But they'll do just fine together for a season. No big deal. So cons. So far it seems like there's none, but there is some. Plugs are more expensive. Let me tell you about how expensive they are, because I think, to me, it's not as expensive. But okay, so let's say bare roots are about 25 to 50 cents a bare root, right? That's about average, I think. Plants, man, they can range from $3 to $10. It's crazy how much they can be. I think it's based on their maturity. Plugs, the Haas ones, they get cheaper as you buy more, and same with the Ison. The more you buy, the cheaper they get. These guys are about $1.50 a plug, and these guys are about $1.25 a plug. Now, the biggest difference between these two, before you jump to Ison is the best ones, the biggest difference I noticed is you can buy these in intervals of 5, 10, 20, and 50. The lowest number that you can buy from Ison that I noticed, don't hold me to it, I looked at Chandler's, was 50. So unless you're putting in a whole thing of them, You may not want 50 plants, although I encourage you, go ahead and get 50 plants, because I don't know, if you're new to growing strawberries, you may not realize you kind of need a lot of plants, which is one of the reasons why I love growing them in these planters, because I can plant a lot of plants. Right here is going to be 6 times 6 is 36, 37, 38, 39, 40 for 1. There's 42 plants in just this one right here, or there will be once I get them all in. That's a lot of plants. But the year that I filled one up, but only 5 tiers. Oh, look at that. It's, should I plant these? Oh, I'm having a debate on whether I should just clip the, I gotta think about it. No, I'm gonna clip them. I want strawberries. But last year I did 30 plants, and that was just 5 tiers. And it fed us with enough strawberries for this season, but not necessarily enough to do like a bunch of preservation stuff. I probably made like 6 jars of jam. And then the rest of it was fresh eating, which is cool, right? But you would think 30 plants, that would be enough for everything. But no, it's about 30 plants per person. So when you're thinking about getting them and you're thinking about the cost, you can imagine that that cost adds up the more plants that you have to get. And that's why bare roots are so attractive to most people. But given their success rate compared to plugs' success rates, you might end up breaking even. I actually didn't even break even with my bare roots. My bare roots, most of them died. I ended up paying $25 for 1 plant. And where these guys, I'm paying between $1.25 and $1.50. Now, if you're interested in either one of these, I think they're still both selling at the time of me recording this. I think they're still selling some. So I'll put the links down below so you can check them out. Once again, the biggest difference, this one you can buy in smaller sizes or smaller volumes, and it also is the variety that the University of Florida recommends. This one, the Ison, you have to buy them in larger quantities. It looks like you get some extra plants because they have a lot of runner plants that are kind of happening in there, and double plants. They look a little bit more root bound than the Haas. The Haas looked nice and independent, and the roots looked good. And both of them shipped beautifully. So I don't think you have any concerns with the shipping on either one of them. Another con that you may not have considered when you get a plug is that they can't really survive for a long period of time before being transplanted. These guys are designed to go in the ground when you get them. So there's no like get them and stick them in the refrigerator for a couple days like you can with bare roots, which I don't necessarily suggest, and most people don't, but you can technically do that with bare roots. When it comes to plugs though, you kind of need to have them in their home pretty quickly. Like, these are actual live plants, and they're going to outgrow. As you can see, some of them have gotten a little bit root bound, and they're going to outgrow that spot really quickly. So we need to get them covered and into some soil in their forever homes. That probably isn't a huge deal for some of us who are just so looking forward to strawberries that we already have a little spot ready. But once you order them, get your spot ready, and so that you're not rushing like I'm doing right now. The other con is going to be varieties. Now, yes, I was able to find some varieties that I like Chandler, and I'm trying out this new Camarosa, which is known for Florida. So cool. I'm excited about that. But most of the time when you get plugs, you don't get a choice. There's maybe, if you're lucky, 2 options to pick from. When you get bare roots, there's hundreds of options to pick from sometimes. So you don't necessarily get the choice that you want, but if you find a producer of your plugs nearby, like these guys are, Ison and Haas, where they're in Georgia and they're similar in our climate, you're going to find plugs that are meant for your area. So I strongly encourage you to try to find plugs or nurseries to buy from that are close by. And I know that's not always the case, and that's not always easy. I had to go a state over because the place I usually get mine from, which are bare roots, isn't selling them this year. And you know, I had such a terrible time with some other places that were not close, like, I mean, Michigan far. And it's just a different climate, and they just don't do as well. So yeah, if you can find them close by, you're more than likely going to get a variety that does work, but you're not going to be able to pick your absolute favorite variety that you've been growing for years and years and years. So it looks like I still have about 30 plants left to go. And so my husband is making another platform because I'm going to set up a whole nother Greenstalk, which is why there's so many tears over my shoulder there and there's still a lot more soil. So I'm just gonna keep going at it and see if I can get all this done tonight before it gets dark. I hope this helps you make some decisions on whether you wanna grow bare roots or whether you wanna grow from plugs. And I hope it also helps you maybe decide to grow some strawberries and pick up some from the places that I mentioned, like Haas or Isone, because those are really good. And I think that they were very, very healthy. And I think that you're really going to enjoy growing strawberries in your garden. Make sure that if you haven't picked up my book, Homegrown Florida Gardening Guide, that you do that. It's an electronic book, 30 different chapters, 30 different vegetables, including strawberries and everything that you ever wanted to know about that. Happy gardening, guys.